They sold her for $100, but they didn't know that buried seeds still grow. This is the story of Liana, a girl traded for survival, who turned pain into purpose and built light where there was once darkness. So before we begin, hit subscribe, drop a hello in the comments, and tell us where you're watching from. Because this story isn't about revenge, it's about grace. The morning light slipped through the curtains as Liana stood by the window, staring at the unfamiliar street below. Cars honked, traders shouted, and somewhere, music floated from a nearby shop. Everything felt strange and too loud. She wasn't used to this kind of life. The city smelled of perfume and fuel. Behind her, the door opened softly. "You didn't sleep?" a voice asked. It was Mr. Terre, the man who brought her from the village. Liana turned and shook her head. "Too many lights," she said quietly. "It feels like the stars are trapped inside the houses." Mr. Terre smiled. "You'll get used to it, child. You'll meet my nephew today. His name is Darren." By noon, the sound of a car pulling up made her heart skip. She stood quickly, straightening the simple dress she'd been given. The door opened, and a tall man stepped in. He had calm eyes, dark skin, and a gentle presence that filled the room without effort. "You must be Liana," he said, smiling. "I'm Darren." She lowered her eyes shyly. "Good afternoon, sir." "Please," he said, waving his hand. "Just Darren. Sit, don't be afraid." She obeyed, sitting on the edge of the sofa. He studied her quietly for a moment. "I know this situation is strange," he began, "but I promise, no harm will come to you here." Darren leaned forward slightly. "My uncle told me your story," he said gently. "He said you've known more hardship than most people know in a lifetime." Liana's eyes filled with confusion and fear. Why did he bring me here?" she asked. Darren smiled faintly. "Because I asked him to find someone real. Someone honest. I wanted to meet a person who sees the world not through wealth, but through truth." She stared at him, unsure what to say. "I'm not special," she whispered. "You'd be surprised," Darren replied softly. "Sometimes, the purest souls come from the hardest soil." The next days felt like a dream. She was too afraid to believe. Liana stayed in the apartment, helping with small chores, but mostly reading the books Darren brought. He visited every day, always asking if she'd eaten, if she'd rested. "Why are you kind to me?" she asked him one evening as they shared tea on the balcony. Darren looked out at the city lights. "Because kindness is how the broken begin to heal." Liana looked down. "People have been kind before, but it always cost me something." Darren turned to her. "Then maybe it's time someone was kind without asking for payment." Weeks passed. Darren began taking her to meetings, explaining his business and teaching her how to speak with confidence. "You don't have to hide," he told her gently. "Your voice deserves to be heard." "I don't know how to talk like you," she admitted shyly. "You don't have to talk like me," he said. "Talk like you." She smiled faintly for the first time in months. One evening, he handed her a folder. "This is what I do," he explained. "Real estate. I build homes. But you," he looked at her carefully, "you remind me that the greatest foundation is a human heart." They spent long nights discussing life, dreams, and loss. Sometimes, Darren would tell her stories of his late mother who taught him never to look down on the poor. "She said the ones who carry pain often carry purpose too," he said softly. "Do you believe that?" Liana asked. "I do," Darren replied. "And I believe you're one of them." Liana looked away, her chest tightening. "No one's ever said that about me." "Then maybe they were too blind to see," Darren murmured. Silence followed, the kind that felt safe. One afternoon, Darren handed her a tablet. "Watch this," he said. It was a video of women speaking at a business summit. "They're telling their stories," he explained. "I want you to tell yours one day." Liana laughed nervously. "Me? Speak in front of people? Never." Darren smiled. "That's what they all say before they change the world." She shook her head but felt warmth in her heart. He believed in her, and that belief was beginning to grow roots. 6 months later, they stood by the ocean. The sun was dipping low, turning the water gold. Darren took her hands. "Liana," he said softly, "I don't want to rush you, but I've known peace only when you're near. You came into my world like dawn after a storm. Will you walk this life with me?" She blinked, her lips trembling. "You mean—" "Yes," he said, smiling. "Will you marry me?" Her tears answered before her voice could. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Darren." Their wedding was small, held on a quiet beach. No gold chairs, no loud music, just friends, laughter, and the soft wind of evening. When they exchanged vows, Darren said, "You were sold for a price, but now you stand beyond price. You were thrown away, but you became a treasure." Liana wept openly, her heart finally free. The villagers who once called her a curse would not recognize the woman she had become. But her story was not over. A year later, she sat in her new home's garden, lost in thought. "You're quiet today," Darren said, joining her. She sighed. "I keep thinking about my stepmother." He nodded. "You want to go back?" "Yes," she whispered. "Not to hurt her. I need to see her. I need her to know I survived." Darren smiled softly. "Then we'll go." She turned to him, surprised. "You'd come with me?" "Always," he said. "No one should face their past alone." The convoy rolled slowly into the village just as the morning mist began to fade. Children stopped playing to stare at the gleaming black cars. Women carrying baskets on their heads froze mid-step. No one had ever seen such luxury in this quiet place. When the first car stopped at the old compound near the mango tree, a hush fell over everyone. The door opened, and Liana stepped out. She wore a soft white dress that flowed like wind over water. Her hair was neatly wrapped, and gold earrings glimmered in the sun. She looked nothing like the girl who once fetched water barefoot. From the small mud house, a woman stumbled out, wiping her hands on her wrapper. Her face was older, thinner, and lined with years of bitterness. It was Mama Zua. For a long second, she stared without recognition. Then her mouth fell open. "Liana," she whispered. The broom slipped from her hand and hit the ground. "Is that you?" Liana looked at her calmly. "It's me, Ma." Behind her, Darren stepped out, tall and silent. The villagers began to gather, whispering and pointing. Mama Zua rushed forward, tears filling her eyes. "My daughter, you came back," she cried, trying to hold her. But Liana stepped back gently. "Please don't call me that." The words struck harder than a slap. Mama Zua's lips trembled. "Liana, I was desperate. I didn't mean you sold me," Liana said quietly. "For $100. The crowd gasped. Mama Zua's shoulders shook. "I had no choice. Your father left me with nothing." Liana's eyes glistened, but her voice stayed calm. "You had a choice, Ma. You just didn't choose me." From the doorway, another figure appeared, Alika, Liana's stepsister. Her expression was full of disbelief. You're alive," she whispered. You thought I'd die in the city?" Liana said softly. "No, Alika. I lived. I learned. And now I'm here." The crowd around them murmured. Some wept quietly, remembering how cruelly Liana had been treated. Alika lowered her head in shame. "I was young and stupid," she said. "I didn't know." "You knew enough to laugh," Liana replied gently. "But I forgive you." Mama Zua fell to her knees. Dust rose around her as she wept. "Forgive me, my child. I was blind. I didn't know your worth." Liana looked down at her for a long moment. Then she opened her purse and brought out an envelope. "This is $10,000, she said softly. "It's enough to pay your debts and start a small business." The crowd gasped again. "Why?" Mama Zua sobbed. "Why would you help me after everything I did?" Liana's face was calm, almost peaceful. "Because I won't become like you." She turned to the villagers, her voice firm and steady. "You all saw what happened to me," she said. "You saw how a girl can be thrown away because she's poor or unwanted. I came back to change that." The people listened in silence. "I will build a school here," she continued. "A place for girls to learn, to dream, to believe they matter." Cheers erupted. Some shouted blessings, others cried openly. Darren stepped forward and placed his hand on her shoulder. "And I will help her build it," he said, "because what she's doing is bigger than both of us." That night, the village celebrated. Fires burned bright under the stars, drums echoed, and children danced. Liana sat quietly by the fire, watching the laughter and song. Mama Zua approached slowly, her face tired but soft. "I don't deserve your kindness," she said. "Maybe not," Liana replied gently, "but you deserve a chance to change." Mama Zua's lips quivered. "I'll try." Liana smiled faintly. "That's all I ask." Behind her, Darren watched the two women, one broken, one reborn, and felt the power of forgiveness ripple through the air like music. The following months were busy. Builders arrived from the city. Trucks brought cement, sand, and paint. Every day, Liana supervised the work, her dress stained with dust, her face glowing with purpose. "You don't have to do this yourself," Darren told her one afternoon. She smiled. "I do. Every wall they raise reminds me that pain can become something strong." He nodded. "You're building more than a school." "Yes," she said softly. "I'm building hope." When the school was finished, it stood like a beacon, yellow walls, blue roofs, and laughter waiting to fill its halls. The villagers named it the Dawn Academy because it rose where darkness once lived. On the first morning of class, dozens of little girls in neat uniforms ran through the gates, their joy echoing across the compound. Liana stood by the entrance, tears in her eyes. Darren came beside her, holding her hand. "You did it," he whispered. "No," she said with a smile. "We did." As the sun climbed higher, an old woman walked slowly toward them, leaning on a cane. Liana froze. It was the same market woman who once told her, "The sun always rises, even after the longest night." The woman smiled knowingly. "I told you, didn't I?" she said. "The sun would find you." Liana laughed softly, through her tears. "Yes, Mama. It found me." The old woman touched her cheek gently. "And now it shines through you." Liana hugged her, whispering, "Thank you for seeing what I couldn't." Months passed, and the school became the heart of the village. Every morning, laughter filled the air as children recited lessons, sang songs, and ran across the courtyard. Parents gathered under the mango tree, watching proudly. For the first time in years, hope lived there. Liana often stood at the window of her small office, smiling as she listened to the sound of joy echoing through the classrooms. "They remind me of myself," she said one afternoon. Darren looked up from his paperwork. "How so?" "Because they all started from dust," she replied quietly, "and now they're blooming." One afternoon, Mama Zua came to the school with a basket of fruits. Her hands trembled as she offered them to Liana. "I brought these from my farm," she said softly. "A small way to say thank you." Liana hesitated, then accepted them with a warm smile. "Thank you, Ma." The older woman's eyes glistened. "I see you every day, teaching, laughing with the girls. You've become everything I wished I could have been." Liana shook her head gently.
"No, Ma.
"I became what you pushed me to become, even through pain." Mama Zua's lips quivered. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. That evening, as the sun painted the sky orange, Liana sat with Darren on the school steps. Children's voices drifted from the dormitories. "When I was small," she said softly, "I used to think my life was a punishment. But now I see it was a preparation." Darren smiled. "You turned suffering into strength. And fear into purpose," she added. He nodded slowly. "You've done something few people ever do. You changed not just your life, but everyone around you." Liana leaned her head against his shoulder. "I just wanted no other girl to feel invisible." A few weeks later, the school hosted its first celebration, a festival of learning. Parents, traders, and travelers filled the compound. The children performed plays and sang songs about courage and kindness. When Liana stepped up to speak, the crowd grew quiet. "I once believed silence was safety," she began. "But silence kept me small. I learned that voice is power. Every girl here deserves to be heard." The audience applauded. Darren watched her proudly, his heart swelling with admiration. "She's not just my wife," he whispered to a friend beside him. "She's the soul of this place." Later that night, under the stars, a group of girls approached Liana shyly. "Auntie Liana," one said, clutching her book, "we want to thank you for building this school." Liana knelt to their level. "You don't need to thank me, my darlings. You're the reason it exists." Another little girl raised her hand. "Is it true someone once said you were worthless?" The question made Liana pause, but she smiled gently. "Yes," she said. "But do you know what I learned?" The girls shook their heads. "Only you get to decide what you're worth." The following day, Darren received a call from the city. A foundation wanted to sponsor the Dawn Academy. "They've seen what you're doing here," he told Liana excitedly. "They want to expand the school to 3 nearby villages." Liana's hand flew to her mouth. "Are you serious?" "Completely," Darren laughed. "They want you to oversee the project." She sat back in her chair, stunned. "Me? But I'm not educated enough for that." "You've educated a whole generation already," Darren said softly. "You just don't give yourself enough credit." Soon, construction began in the neighboring villages. Liana visited each site, encouraging workers, talking with local leaders, and comforting mothers who feared sending their daughters to school. "Education doesn't take daughters away," she told them gently. "It brings them home wiser." People began calling her Mama Light, the woman who brought sunrise wherever she went. When she heard the nickname, she laughed softly. "I used to live in darkness," she said to Darren. "Now they call me Light." "Life is strange, isn't it?" "Strange and beautiful," he replied, kissing her hand. One rainy evening, Liana found Mama Zua sitting under the veranda, weeping quietly. "Ma, what's wrong?" Liana asked, kneeling beside her. The older woman shook her head. "It's Alika," she sobbed. "She left for the city. Said she wants to start anew, but she's fallen in with bad company." Liana sighed deeply. "She's still your child. We'll find her." "After how I treated you," Mama Zua whispered. "You still care?" "Because hate doesn't heal anything, Ma. Love does." Mama Zua buried her face in her hands and wept harder. Days later, Liana and Darren traveled to the city to search for Alika. After asking around, they found her in a small bar, tired and pale, serving drinks to rowdy men. "Alika," Liana said softly. The girl turned, her eyes widening. "You came?" she asked in disbelief. "Of course," Liana replied. "Let's go home." "Home?" Alika laughed bitterly. "That place never wanted me." "That's not true anymore," Liana said firmly. "Mama needs you. She's sorry." Alika's lips trembled. "I don't deserve forgiveness." "Neither did I," Liana whispered. "But I got it anyway." Back in the village, Mama Zua ran to her daughter, tears falling freely. "My child," she cried, hugging Alika tightly. "I thought I'd lost you too." Alika clung to her, sobbing. "I'm sorry, Mama." Liana stood watching, her own eyes wet. Darren slipped an arm around her. "You've given this family back to each other," he said quietly. "You've built more than schools, Liana. You've built healing." She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what I was meant to do all along." He nodded. "Yes, my love. You were meant to turn wounds into wisdom." News of Liana's work spread far beyond the small villages. Reporters came from the city to document what they called the Dawn Movement. They filmed the classrooms, interviewed the girls, and spoke about the woman who was once sold for a handful of money but now built futures from dust. Liana became a quiet symbol of hope. Yet she never chased fame. When people asked how she did it, she always said, "By remembering who I used to be." Darren would smile proudly beside her, holding her hand as cameras flashed. "You've changed lives, Liana," he said softly one night. "But you've also changed mine." A few weeks later, Liana was invited to speak at a women's conference in the capital. She hesitated at first, her heart filled with old fear. "What if I stumble?" she asked Darren. "Then you'll get back up," he said gently. "That's what you've done all your life." So she went. The hall was large and bright, filled with hundreds of women dressed in colors like flowers after rain. When her name was called, the audience applauded loudly. She stepped onto the stage, her palms sweating, her heart pounding, but her voice, when she spoke, was steady. "I stand before you," she began, "as someone who was once told she was worth less than the food on the table. I was sold, forgotten, and left to disappear. But someone showed me kindness. That small light led me out of darkness. So today, I stand not as a victim, but as a reminder that pain can become power if you refuse to stay buried." The hall fell silent, then erupted in cheers. Women rose to their feet, clapping, crying, shouting her name. Darren watched from the front row, tears in his eyes. "That's my wife," he whispered proudly. After the conference, women approached her one by one, teachers, mothers, even business owners. They shared stories of struggle, loss, and hope. Some offered donations for the Dawn Academy. Others asked for her guidance to start schools in their own towns. "You've started a fire that won't go out," Darren said as they drove home that night. Liana looked out the window at the city lights. "I don't want it to," she murmured. "I want every girl who feels invisible to know she was born to shine." Back in the village, Liana found Mama Zua teaching women how to make soap and weave baskets. "You've started something beautiful, Ma," Liana said, smiling. The older woman laughed softly. "I just followed your example, my daughter." That word, daughter, didn't sting anymore. It felt right now warm and whole. "Do you forgive yourself?" Liana asked quietly. Mama Zua paused, her hands stilling. "I'm trying," she said honestly. Liana reached out and hugged her. "Then you're already halfway there." The two women stood together, the past fading like smoke in the evening air. That same week, Alika began teaching literacy to younger girls at the school. "I want them to know they're enough," she told Liana shyly. "You're doing that," Liana replied, placing a hand on her shoulder. The sisters shared a smile that spoke of old pain finally healed. Darren watched them from afar and whispered to himself, "This is what grace looks like." Later that night, he and Liana sat by the riverbank, the moon reflecting on the water. "Do you ever think about the first night you arrived in the city?" he asked. She nodded. "All the time. I thought my life was ending, but it was just beginning." Seasons changed. The trees around the Dawn Academy blossomed, and the village market grew busier than ever. People from far and near came to trade, to learn, to build. "You've brought life to this place," the old village chief told Liana during a community gathering. "Before you came, this was just dust and silence." Liana smiled humbly. "The people brought the change, not me," she said. "I only reminded them that they could." The chief nodded. "Then may your reminder live for generations." The crowd cheered, their voices carrying into the night. One evening, as rain began to fall softly, Liana stood by her window, listening to the sound of thunder rolling in the distance. She turned to Darren and smiled. "Do you remember the old woman from the market? The one who told you the sun always rises?" he asked. "Yes." She was right. But she didn't tell me something else, that after sunrise, you have to help others see it too. Darren walked over and kissed her forehead. "And that's what you've done, my love. You've made sure no one walks in darkness again." Years passed, but the legend of Liana and the Dawn Academy only grew stronger. Children who once learned under her roof became teachers, doctors, and leaders. Some returned to the village to continue her dream. Others carried her lessons to faraway towns. Every wall she built, every girl she taught, became another sunrise somewhere in the world. When people asked her secret, she always said, "Love without expecting, give without counting, and forgive even when it hurts." Those words became the heart of every school built in her name. One quiet morning, Liana walked through the empty schoolyard before the children arrived. The sun was climbing gently, painting the walls gold. She paused under the same mango tree where her journey began years ago. Closing her eyes, she whispered, "Thank you for not letting me break." The wind rustled the leaves, carrying her words away. Darren called from the distance, "The children are waiting." She turned, smiling. Coming. As she walked toward the laughter and life she had created, her steps were light, no longer burdened by the past, but lifted by grace. As the years passed, the Dawn Foundation became a national movement. Schools sprouted in villages across the country, each carrying the same yellow walls and blue roofs that marked the beginning of Liana's dream. She and Darren traveled often, meeting with leaders, donors, and parents who wanted the same change for their daughters. "Everywhere we go," Darren said one evening on a flight, "people speak your name like a prayer." Liana smiled softly, looking out the window at the clouds below. "Then may that prayer never end," she whispered, "because the world still needs more dawns." When Liana turned 50, the village held a grand celebration in her honor. The schoolyard overflowed with children, graduates, teachers, and families whose lives she had touched. Banners stretched across the courtyard, the woman who chose grace over revenge. Mama Zua, now gray-haired but strong, sat in the front row, her eyes full of pride and peace. Alika stood beside her, helping organize the event. Darren took the microphone and smiled at the crowd. "Years ago," he said, "a frightened girl came to the city with nothing but courage. Today, she stands as a light for all who've ever been told they were nothing. My wife, my heart, Liana." The audience rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, and chanting her name. When Liana stepped up to speak, her voice trembled at first, then steadied like the wind after rain. "I was once sold for $100, she said, her eyes glistening. "But what I learned is that no one can truly sell your worth unless you give it away. I forgave not because they asked, but because I needed peace. Grace built my future, not bitterness." She looked toward Mama Zua, who smiled through tears, and toward the students, who listened in awe. "So, when life buries you," she continued softly, "don't curse the soil. Grow roots. Let the sun find you. Because the same ground meant to end you can raise you higher." The crowd erupted in applause. The sound carried far beyond the school walls, into the hills, the markets, the hearts of everyone who heard her story. As the sky turned golden, Liana looked toward the horizon and smiled. The girl who was once forgotten had become the woman who taught the world to rise. And somewhere, as the evening breeze whispered through the mango leaves, the old woman's voice seemed to echo once more. "The sun always rises." And please don't forget to tap the bell, so every new folktale reaches you first. Tell us in the comments what you think about the story. And tell us where you're watching from. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share this beautiful story with friends, family, and loved ones so they too can remember.